TSN hockey analyst, former Vancouver Canuck, Mr. Frank Corrado. Frankie, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How you guys doing?
Fantastic, buddy. 12 years ago today, you were wrapped up a season with the Sudbury Wolves. You sat down to watch Game 7, Vancouver Canucks, Boston Bruins Stanley Cup Final, not knowing that merely days from then, you would be selected by the Canucks in the 5th round.
It's crazy. And I was actually very much rooting for the Canucks in that playoff run. I'd really taken a liking to that team and all the characters. And even, I know it's always a thing out west, right? Like, people in Vancouver don't care much for Toronto, but I had no idea that was a thing at all. I was 100% on the Canucks bandwagon. And then days later during the draft, I was playing golf and got the call. And when my agent told me I got picked, he goes, "You just got selected by the Stanley Cup runner-ups." And I wasn't sure if he was going to say Stanley Cup champions. They said Stanley Cup runner-ups in Vancouver. And very, very crazy. We were talking about it this morning with a few people. Just crazy to think that was on this day, and what actually happened and transpired it's hard to believe that actually happened.
I love you, Frank, but I'm calling bullshit. I don't believe that you were pulling for the Vancouver Canucks. Nobody east of the Rockies was pulling for the Vancouver Canucks.
You got to also remember, I grew up a big time Leaf fan. You think I wanted Boston to win?
That's true. Yes.
I had nothing against the Canucks. I definitely had something against Boston as a Leaf fan. Yeah.
Checkmate, Blake.
Yes,
he's got you.
yeah.
And he's the one who was rooting for the Canucks east of the Rockies. Hey, you were playing golf on draft day, Frank? Like, you weren't sitting there gripped to the draft tracker and refreshing?
I might as well have been, because I kept getting texts from people saying, "Oh, this guy just got drafted and that person got drafted." So the whole point of playing golf was to get my mind off things and not be so wrapped up in it. And it was a good idea. I'm happy we did it, because I was ranked, I think, 155, and I wasn't ranked until that final list came out, which is basically close to draft time. So it was one of those things where it's obviously not going to go to the draft, and I figured why put myself through it watching it. So I just played golf all day, and then I think we were on the 10th hole, and it was a slow, I was so happy to leave the course, obviously, because I got drafted, but the round was so incredibly slow. So as soon as we got the call, we literally I think we were on a par 5. Our balls were up by the green. We just said, we're out of here. See you later.
Rest assured, the only thing slower than that round of golf was the second day of the draft. That's the only other thing that lasts longer.
Yeah, Blake and I have covered a few of those.
Yeah.
And they tend to linger. Hey, ranked 155, drafted 150, Frankie. So your stock moved up.
Yes.
As we got closer to the draft. Who did you hear from first from the Canucks? Was it Ron Delorme?
No, it was Dan Palango.
Oh, Dan. Okay.
Dan was the scout that interviewed me leading up to the draft, and he was the first person that called. I think Dan probably pushed my name to the front. Well, not to the front of the line in the 5th round, but it was great to hear from him, because I think I had interviewed with 10 teams leading up to the draft, so obviously not the 30 that there was, and so you're holding on for a little bit of hope that one of those 10 interviews went really, really well. And the Vancouver interview, I thought, was one of my strongest ones, and I had left feeling really good about it. But you never know. No one's ever going to give you any kind of indication as far as what to expect, and I wouldn't want that anyways. I wouldn't want a team to say, "Yeah, if you're there in the 4th or 5th round, rest assured we're going to take you," because then what happens when something goes awry that day? You just feel way more disappointed. So it was one of my best interviews, and it made sense that after that Vancouver had picked me.
I'm guessing you didn't get dinner, huh?
No, I didn't. See,
no.
You don't have to wine and dine me, buddy.
No.
I'm just very grateful. Very grateful. You know what? Maybe a coffee and a bagel at Tim Hortons. That'll suffice.
Yeah.
Well, it makes a lot of sense that Dan Palango, because Dan worked with Mike Gillis even before he became GM of the Canucks. So I know he was a trusted voice. I can tell you this story from that draft table is that as the pick was coming up in the 5th round, I know Gillis went to Ron Delorme and said, "Hey, who are we taking here? And is it time that we take that Corrado kid from Sudbury?" And Delorme said, "Well, he's our deep sleeper. We were thinking maybe a little later, and Mike and Dan said, let's not risk it. Let's just take him now, and we'll take another deep sleeper with the next pick.
Looking just quickly on that, looking back at it, if you look at some of the picks that were made after that, they were teams that I had interviewed with. So I think New Jersey picked Reese Scarlett, and I had interviewed with New Jersey. That was another one I felt good about. And then San Jose had picked Dylan DeMello. Both of those guys are right-handed defensemen. I had interviewed with San Jose. And I can't remember if the Leafs, I'd interviewed with the Leafs, and I felt good about that one as well. I don't think they took a right-shot defenseman. I think they took David Brohl and Garrett Sparks later in that draft.
They sure did.
But those were ones that I was like, looking back at it, there's two teams I interviewed. So we were probably all, like myself, Scarlett, DeMello, in like a clump of names, whereas, okay, if they take this one, we'll take that one kind of thing.
And one of those in the clump of names, another right-shot defenseman, was Josh Manson, who went 10 picks after you to Anaheim.
See, he's a much better player, though. Like
Did you start to get competitive with any of the guys that were sort of being mentioned? Like, we're just like, as long as I go above so-and-so, I'll feel good about it.
You know what? I think I was just more thinking, I just want to get drafted. That's all. I didn't really care about guys going before, because really what happens is once you just get your foot in the door and you're at development camp and training camp, you're pretty much on an equal play. Yeah, totally. You're all there. You just need an invite to the dance, Blake, and then what you do with the dance when you put those dancing shoes on, that's up to you.
That's up to your game, right? That's up to your game.
Just get the invite.
Laurent Brossoit went in that draft a few picks after Frankie as well. So a lot of NHL talent came out of those 5th, 6th rounds in the 2011 NHL entry draft. We're pointing forward to the 2023 entry draft, Frankie. And last week we heard of, the dinner 5 that the Canucks took to out for a meal at the Combine. We haven't talked as much about this Colby Barlow kid, the winger in from the OHL, but I know you've seen him and have a good book on him. What can you tell us about Barlow?
He's one of the most impressive kids that I've seen this year. Just like from a hockey point of view, I will say this, like he's a 17-year-old kid. He's the captain up in Owen Sound. And it seems like he's well suited to be the captain. Like he's very mature, and he had a great year, like great scoring touch, power forward, plays with a lot of jam. Like a team that takes him is going to be very happy. He's very, very well-rounded player. But we were just at the OHL award ceremonies yesterday, and a few of us from TSN were handing out some awards, and we got to hear this really cool Colby Barlow story. So he was the recipient of one of the Scholastic Awards for achievement in, I believe, high school. And the academic advisor for the Owen Sound Attack had a great story about Colby. And basically she said, here's a week in the life of Colby Barlow. So they hosted Hockey Day in Canada up in Owen Sound. So he was a big part of that because he's a top prospect. So he was doing interviews. He was involved in activities around the community. So he did 2 days of that. Then the Owen Sound Attack had 2 games on the weekend, so they had to travel. They played at home. And then after that, he had to fly out to Langley to play the Top Prospects game. And then he came back the next day, and he had an exam. And so you think about what the previous 4 days were like for him. He gets back from the Top Prospects game, has an exam, and apparently, nails the exam, gets a 92% or something like that. So, the kid is just so impressive because not only is he a stud on the ice and he's so consistent and he's so mature and he's a captain at a young age and he takes it all in stride. To see what he was able to do off the ice with all those things happening around him, it could be so easy for a young kid like that to get overwhelmed and just, I just need to focus on hockey. I can't do the exam. Can you cut me a break? It's like the kid wasn't looking for any excuses. He was so dialed in. It was really impressive. And I got an opportunity to see him when he was younger, believe it or not, because he's in 05 and my wife's cousin is in 05. So every once in a while I'd go watch him play, and he would play against Colby Barlow. At one point they played on the same team together with the Toronto Junior Canadiens. And he was one of those kids that grew a lot quicker than the other kids. So there were, I think, question marks okay, what's going to happen when everyone else grows? Is he going to be that kid that just grew way too soon and was dominant that way? When he gets to the OHL, has a dominant rookie season, for a 16-year-old standards, really, really good. Then does this, improves on that as a second-year player. Even, he's just a really impressive kid, and I think he's going to make one NHL team very, very happy, whoever steps up and picks him.
Well, it's to tie this discussion together. Back in that Gillis era, they used to look for people who achieved in other walks of life beyond hockey. I can remember Mike saying to me once, if a kid is NHL draft level hockey player, but also excels in something else in life, that tells you something about the character of the young man. Of course, with you, Frank, I think it was your golf game that attracted the Vancouver Canucks. Were like, this kid is already a scratch golfer at 17, 18 years old.
Yeah. Maybe too much time on the golf course.
By the way, I just went down a rabbit hole there as you were mentioning the OHL awards. Pavel Mintyukov got the Defenseman of the Year award in the OHL this year.
Yeah.
The Ducks got Defenseman of the Year in every single
league.
CHL league.
I believe so.
It's crazy. It's crazy to think how strong that prospect pool is, but more specifically on the back end, like Zellweger, Tristan Luneau, and Mintyukov. I actually forgot. I was sitting there yesterday, and they started talking about Mintyukov, and they said the Anaheim Ducks, and my brain almost exploded out of my head. I'm like, are you kidding me?
Yes.
How do these guys have – they're going to have an unbelievable blue line in a couple of years, and it's not just those three. Like, I think Hines is in the queue. He's an Anaheim kid as well. There's a ton of talent coming up that pipeline on the back end.
Can you imagine?
Yeah, Noah Warren in Gatineau.
That's right. Noah Warren. Yeah,
another defenseman they took in the second round last year. Nate Danielson is another player they took out for dinner. The Brandon centerman. What do you know about him?
Yeah, so we didn't get to see Brandon this year in our CHL coverage, but I can tell you, like, from watching a little bit here and there, like, really fast and makes plays at high speed, which I think would be very enticing to a lot of teams. And if there's anything, like, obviously all these players have a lot of points, but he doesn't take a lot of scoring chances, if that makes sense. Like, he's quality over quantity, if that makes sense. So you think, okay, maybe there's more there too if he takes a few more shots. Like, he's obviously a playmaking kind of guy, but the thing that would entice a lot of teams is the fact that he's skating at high speed, making plays at high speed, and it seems like he's not out of his reach doing so. I think a lot of times when teams see players like that, there's a question mark. Okay, like, is that sustainable over 82 games? Is that going to be something that he can do? And when you see it every single night like that, and a lot of players, like, for them to make plays, they got to slow things down. Like, and a lot of the best plays are made just a tad slower. Like, but if he's going to be one of those guys that can do it at high speed, you're obviously going to have an advantage, and it can throw teams off a little bit as well. So he's another guy that I think a lot of teams would be excited about. It makes sense the Canucks are wanting to take him out for sure.
Lastly, Frankie, we're digesting this Vegas Stanley Cup victory. Is there anything that teams can replicate from Vegas? Is there any lessons learned here, models, or anything that stuck out to you about this particular team's journey and construction on road to a championship?
Yeah, it's been so interesting following the narratives around Vegas, because the first thing that comes up is a lot of people will say, well, they got handed a really good team right off the bat in expansion. To that, I would say is that they proceeded to take players that other teams had undervalued, and they did a really good job of identifying that. So that's step number one. So they do that, and then constantly they've identified what their needs are, and they have aggressively pursued that. So they needed a number one center. They knew that. Even though they went to the finals that year against Washington and lost, they kind of knew they needed that elite number one center, and it took them a long time to get that guy, but they finally got it in Jack Eichel. And think about if you're another team around the league and you had Alex Tuck and you had a young kid in Peyton Krebs, you got to have some stones to make that deal, because Alex Tuck is a really good player. And a lot of teams would be like, no, we're not going there. We're not going there. But they were willing to do it. And then in free agency, they try and get Alex Pietrangelo. And I know, like, they do have an advantage there because there's no state tax, and it's very enticing for a player like that to sign a big deal there. But I guess the moral of the story is this. If other teams want to get on Vegas's level, let's say, stop undervaluing talent that you have within your own organization, because it's a great example of the fact that there's players, whether it's in the American Hockey League, or lower in your lineup that can probably benefit from an opportunity and make the most of it. And then these excuses like, we're up against the cap, or, there's no trades to be made, no one's picking up the phone. They've kind of proven everyone wrong. They can go out and make those trades, and they're not afraid to do so. And if you think your window to win is right now, go make it happen. That's what they've been all about. And maybe they've been loud when they've done it, but who cares? Because now they're 6 years in and they've won a Stanley Cup. And they said they wanted to make the playoffs in 3 years and win a cup in 6. And they look pretty damn good right now. As far as their team construction, like big, strong, mobile defensemen, play a little bit nasty, and a deep lineup. It's not like we're not splitting the atom here. It's stuff everyone knows, but how to execute it. That's what Vegas has done really well.
Fantastic point about aggressively pursuing the needs, because as much as they were given a pretty good team out of the chute, selected a pretty good team out of the chute, you're absolutely right. It was center ice, and you see that a little bit with Seattle here, and I think that's one of the reasons why they went Beniers and Wright with their first 2 first-round picks. It is very difficult outside of once every 10 years when Buffalo does it and once every 10 years when Boston does it to acquire number one centermen via a trade, and sure enough, they were the winners of the Eichel sweepstakes.
What do you think of the goaltending position? What do you if you're a GM, what how much priority are you giving the goaltending position right now?
It's tough. It's tough because you got two sides of the coin. Bobrovsky, $10.5 million, big free agent signing. He literally got that team to the Stanley Cup Finals. I don't want to say single-handedly, but if he's not as brilliant as he is, they're not there. They're just
But against all odds, Alex Lyon was your starter, and Alex Lyon doesn't make $10 million.
Alex Lyon, it doesn't make any sense. And Adin Hill, he had really good numbers this year, and I was having some conversations with people like Adin Hill should get a little more love for the Conn Smythe. And I'm like, hey, listen, he played really well. He made some big saves. He's probably going to get rewarded with a nice contract now, more than he would have gotten previously. But let's call a spade, man. Like, if Larry Brossoit was in net, would that Vegas team still have beat the Florida Panthers? Probably. Like, Jonathan Quick could have been in net. I truly believe they still would have won. Like, that team is just so well built in front of him. It's hard to figure out these goalies. And, even looking at the year, like Jacob Markstrom, the guy everyone in Vancouver knows, for me, like, before this year, he is constantly in my top 5 best goalies in the league. But he had a down year. So how do you account for that? It's a
voodoo.
Weird position. It's hard to account for it. You need a little bit of luck, just like playing on the ice. You need some luck. I think in management, you need some luck, and you have to hope maybe you hit on a goaltender who's getting hot at the right time, or you're catching him on the upswing in his career. And it's hard to evaluate that. It's hard to execute on it. Mm-hmm. But go sign the big free agent, get to the Cup Finals, have a guy who's maybe deeper in the depth chart, but you have a really good team in front of him, win the Stanley Cup. Like, I don't know the answer. I really don't know the answer when it comes to goalies, but I know you need a damn good goalie, or a goalie that's playing very well, if you want to make any kind of noise.
Marvelous stuff, Frankie. We'll end it there for this week, but look forward to our next conversation. We're a couple of weeks away from the draft, so it's going to be exciting times here with the Canucks looking to add a top prospect. Thanks for this.
Thanks, fellas.
This clip presented by Ronan North Vancouver. Family owned and operated for gifts for Dad for Father's Day. Visit Ronan North Vancouver, 915 West 1st Street.